Okay, so we're going to be covering chapter 2. And in this chapter, we're going to look at the body as a whole. We're going to look at the structural organization of the body. We're going to talk about different cavities in the body. We're going to look at some of the anatomy and the divisions of the abdomen into 9 regions and into 4 quadrants. We're going to divide the back into different divisions and be able to name those. We're going to get familiar with some directional terms and planes of the body. And we're always going to be able to understand our medical terms, build and break down. So here's my focus for you. Knowing the word parts and their meanings. There are some tricky words that are exposed in this chapter. Larynx, pharynx, and trachea. I want you not only to know the combining forms, but know what they are. So when a word ends in an X, you're going to drop the X and make a GO to come up with the combining form. So laryngo and pharyngo. Trachea, the combining form is tracheo. Now, I want you to know what they are in everyday common English. The larynx is the voice box. The pharynx is the throat. So be careful not to confuse those. Trachea is the windpipe that goes down to your lungs. In the urinary system, you have ureters and urethra, and people commonly confuse those. And this is my trick for you here. Ureter has 2 E's in it, and there are 2 tubes. So there's 2 E's in ureter. There are 2 tubes that go from the kidneys to the bladder. And so the tubes that go from the kidneys to the bladder are the ureters. Uretero is the combining form. From the bladder to the outside of the body, there's 1 tube, 1 E in the word urethra, or the combining form is urethro. Study your flashcards, be able to build and break down words. The exercises in the book and elsewhere will help you practice and apply those. In addition, in this chapter, I want you to know the 9 abdominal pelvic regions and the 4 abdominal quadrants. Be careful, the abdomen is a body cavity and the stomach is an organ of the digestive system, so don't mix up those terms. I do want you to familiar with the positional and directional terms and the planes of the body. And on Blackboard, under additional interest in videos, there is a video that will help with the directional terms and planes of the body as well. So starting the chapter here, we're going to talk about some of the organization of the body. And remember, we're not an anatomy course, but you'll see here that there are combining forms that go along with this. So the base structure of our body is a cell, and the combining forms are cyto or cellulo. And then as those cells form similar jobs, they form tissues, and tissues, the combining form is histo. Be careful with that one. It doesn't really sound like tissue. As tissues form together and do similar things, they form into organs. Organo sounds like that and makes sense, but viscero is also a combining form for organs. We refer to our internal organs as the visceral organs. And then as organs come together, they form systems, systemo, and the rest of our book will go through the different body systems, respiratory, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, etc. So we will expose you a little bit to that in this chapter, but most of that will be covered in future chapters of the book. So the basic structure of the body is the cell, cyto or cellulo, and the cell has a cell membrane on the outside that holds everything in and protects it. In the center of the cell is the nucleus, and you'll see there is a combining form, karyo, for that. And we can do a picture or a mapping of the nucleus, which is called a karyotype, and you will see a picture of that in your book. Karyotype will map out the chromosomes. The chromosomes, some means body, chromo means color, so they are the colored bodies that appear in the nucleus, and that is what makes up our DNA structure, the chromosomes. All the stuff in between the cell membrane is kind of a gelatinous, and it is the cytoplasm. Plasm means formation and cyto means cell, so it's what gives the cell its shape. Now, in your anatomy courses, you may talk about the endoplasmic reticulum, which is pertaining to within the formation of the cell, and it's these little canals here where we store up our nutrients. To me, they look like pantry shelves. And then the mitochondria will break down and release energies. And to me, those look like pills that will break in half. Don't stress over those for this course, but karyotype has a combining form, so definitely be familiar with that. Chromosome breaks down, cytoplasm breaks down. So homeostasis, stasis means controlling, and homeo means same, and our body likes to keep things normal or the same, and so our body has many mechanisms to maintain homeostasis. You'll hear that word in some of our other chapters. Metabolism, ism is a process, meta of change, and bol to cast. So it's the process of casting change. Our body is constantly in change, burning and using calories and storing them up when we don't need them so that we have them for later. So metabolism is the whole process, and that is made up of anabolism and catabolism. So anabolism is the process of casting up or storing up energies, and catabolism is the process of casting down or breaking down those energies to be utilized. So those words actually can break down, and they may help you in your anatomy physiology courses. Now, different types of cells that we have in their body we'll talk about in some of our other chapters, but muscle cells are myo, nerve cells, neuro, watch the spelling on that, N-E-U-R-O, fat cells are lipo, and epithelial is actually a unique word. It's a little bit of a misnomer. All means pertaining to, epi means upon, and thelio means nipple. So it literally means pertaining to upon the nipple. But what I want you to know is it is truly all of your surface skin cells with that. Be careful with myo, M-Y-O, not to confuse it with myelo, M-Y-E-L-O, which can mean bone marrow or spinal cord. So cyto or cellulo, the cells, form tissues, histo, and with tissues we'll talk about the parenchymal or the essential tissues, the essential working functioning unit of a system. Now parenchymal actually breaks down, but it doesn't really help too much in it. All is pertaining to par is near, n is in, and chymo is juice. So it literally means pertaining to being near or in the juice, but parenchymal is the essential working tissues. We'll talk about in the urinary system, the kidneys are the parenchymal tissue, where the other parts of the urinary system just carry the urine. The kidneys make the urine. Histologist, then, logist is one who specializes in the knowledge of tissues. And we talked about the different types, the epithelial, the muscle, myo, different types of connective tissue, which can include the muscle, and nervous tissue, neuro, in there. As I said, in K through 12, you're exposed to a lot of body systems. So tissues come into organs, organo and visceral. Visceral being the internal organs, and those make up systems. You can see here your digestive system, your nervous system, your reproductive systems, your urinary system, your pulmonary system, your endocrine system is to secrete within. It's your hormonal system. So we are going to talk about those in more detail in our other chapters. Your book does have some organs that are in some of those different systems, so look at that and familiarize those. Remember, pharynx means throat. Ureters and urethra, don't confuse those. Ureters are the tubes from the kidneys to the bladder, and the urethra is the tube from the bladder to the outside. In your respiratory system, larynx is your voice box, and trachea is your windpipe. I do want you to be familiar with those being exposed in this chapter. So a question to think about here, the combining form for histo refers to A or an, A, a cell, B, tissue, C, organ, D, system. So histo does refer to a cell, B on there. Now, what was the combining forms for, histo refers to tissue. What was the combining forms for cell? Cyto or cellular. Organ, we had organo or visceral. and system, we had systemo. Now in your book it does have this picture, and we're going to talk about the different body cavities or vaults, or the areas where we can put different organs into. First we need to talk about which side of the body, the front or the back. The front many people know as the anterior, and the back many people know as posterior, but there are other names for this, the ventral and the dorsal. So a way I remember these is if you write anterior with a capital A and flip that A upside down, you'll have ventral. So anterior and ventral both mean the front side. Now if you write posterior with a lowercase p and you kind of rotate it around, you'll have a D for dorsal, and invert it, you'll have a B for back. So posterior, dorsal, and back all mean the same. So the cavities we have on the posterior side, up in the head, so in the cranial vault, what organ do you think is in there? Right, the brain. And remember the combining form for brain? Encephalo. Cephalo is the head, but encephalo is what's in the head, which is the brain. And then the hemispheres of the brain, we have cerebrum or cerebro. So in the cranial vault is the brain, encephalo. Then the vertebral column is the bones, the vertebrae, and there is a space in there called the spinal vault. And the spinal vault, the spinal vault contains the spinal column or the spinal cord. So pertaining to the spine is spinal. Now our anterior cavities or vaults, we have a dividing line here, the diaphragm, which is the muscle that helps us breathe, and the diaphragm divides the thoracic from the abdominal cavity. So diaphragm, we have diaphragmo, diaphragmato, and phreno are the combining forms for that. Now the thoracic cavity, ic means pertaining to, thoraco means chest. So what organs are in the thoracic cavity? In the middle of the chest, in between the lungs, we have what's called the mediastinal space. And in the mediastinal space is the heart, which is cardio. And we also have the lungs, which is pulmono or pulmo, in there. Now below the diaphragm, we have the abdominal cavity. We have a lot of organs of digestion in there. So this is pertaining to the abdomen. Remember, abdomen is a cavity. In the abdomen, we have the organ stomach, gastro. We have the liver, hepato. We have the gallbladder, which is cholecysto, cholecysto. We have the small intestine, which is entero. We have the large intestine, which is colo or colano. We have the spleen, which is spleno. And be careful with spleen because it only has one E when you make a combining form, spleno. Lots of other organs in the abdominal cavity. And then down in between your hips, you have the pelvic cavity pertaining to the pelvis. And that's where you have the urinary bladder, cysto. You have some of your reproductive organs in there. So those are our body cavities and some of the contents of them. So again here, the ventral cavity, we have the thoracic, the abdominal, and the pelvic cavities. We talked about the mediastinum, the middle in between the lungs where the heart is, and the combining form for mediastinum is mediastino. Is a structure or a thing. Around the lungs, there's a double membrane, which is the pleura, and there is the pleural cavity. Pleuro is the combining form. And in that double membrane, there's just a little bit of fluid, and that keeps it so it can move as the lungs expand. You see that we might get infections in there. Pleuritis can be very painful. In the abdominal cavity, we said was divided the thoracic from the abdominal from the diaphragm. Diaphragmo, diaphragmato, and phreno is the combining form. In the abdominal cavity, there is a double membrane in there that is called the peritoneum, and it's kind of a clamshell membrane where the clamshell kind of holds all the organs in the internal cavity. Your kidneys are retroperitoneal, pertaining to behind the peritoneum. So here is a picture of your anterior view, and you'll see a lot of the organs in there. Up here you can see the trachea, which is the windpipe. Tracheo is the combining form. This little gland we'll talk about in the endocrine chapter is your thyroid gland, works with your metabolism, and the combining form there is thyroido. Your lungs, pulmo and pulmono, are the combining forms. Your heart, cardio. The large artery that comes off of the heart is the aorta or aorto. We talked about the diaphragm is this dome-shaped muscle that divides the thoracic from the abdominal cavity. Diaphragmo, diaphragmato, and freno. The liver here is hepato. Don't confuse that with hemato, is blood. The little green under here is your gallbladder, cholecysto, cholecysto. The stomach you're familiar with is gastro. We have the spleen hidden back there, spleno, with only one E, S-P-L-E-N-O. We have your pancreas hidden here behind the stomach, pancreato. Your small intestine is all this in the middle, is entero. And then your large intestine is colo or colano, and the sigmoid colon is sigmoido. Then you have your rectum, recto, anus, ano. Here's your bladder, is cysto. Your appendix hangs off the colon, and that's appendico. So we'll talk about those in other chapters, but that gives you a little bit of an overview. So which body cavity contains the pleural cavity and the mediastinum? Is it the cranial, the pelvic, the spinal, or the thoracic? And thoracic is the correct answer. Which body cavity contains the peritoneum? The combining form was peritoneo. Is the A, abdominal, B, pelvic, C, spinal, or D, thoracic? And that is the abdominal. That was the membrane that holds all the organs in the abdominal cavity. Here's a posterior view. You can see often protected by the bones there, the scapulas, the shoulder blades, the ribs, the spine. This triangle bone down here is the sacrum, and then the coccyx is the tailbone, the hip bones you can see here. So the back can be divided into different areas, and I do want you to know these different areas to be able to name them. You don't need to come up with how many bones in each area. But the cervical spine pertaining to the neck, cervical can also mean the neck of the uterus in a female, but pertaining to the neck, we take the C for cervical, and there are 7 bones there. You don't have to know that for this class, but it's labeled C1 through C7. Thoracic, pertaining to the chest, is kind of associated with your ribs, but it's the vertebrae of the back there. Pertaining to the chest, T for thoracic, T1 through T12. Lumbar or loin is between your ribs and between your hips, and those are L1 through L5. Sacral is that triangle bone that we had, and it is pertaining to the sacrum, S1 through S5, and they're actually fused together. And then your tailbone is the coccyx or coccygeal, pertaining to the coccyx, and those are 4 bones fused together. Now, in order to talk about directional terms, we need to know our starting point. And so our starting point is the anatomical position, which is facing forward with your arms facing forward as well, your palms facing forward. So we will talk about different directions, and if you're not in the right position, it will mix up which one is the lateral and which one is the medial aspect of your arms there. No. Also, with anatomical position, we need to make sure that we are referring to the patient's right and the patient's left, not our right and left. Now, our abdominal cavity I want you to be able to know the 9 abdominal regions, and also we're going to divide it into 4 quadrants. So here's the 9 abdominal regions. If we draw a tic-tac-toe on the abdomen, the center region is already marked with our belly button, our umbilicus. So it is called the umbilical region. Now, superior means above, inferior means below. So superior to the umbilical region, the middle upper region, is called the epigastric region because it is upon the stomach, pertaining epi, upon, gastro, stomach, and you can see the stomach is mostly in that region there. Below or inferior to the umbilical region is the hypogastric region. Now it is pertaining to below the stomach. It is below the stomach, way below, but remember the umbilical region was already named. So you have the epigastric, the umbilical, and the hypogastric there. Now medial means towards the middle of your body. Lateral means towards the sides of your body. So if you talk about the superior lateral regions, they are called the hypochondriac regions. IAC means pertaining to, hypo, below, and chondro, cartilage, the cartilage of your ribs. So the hypochondriac regions. And remember, we have the patient's right and the patient's left hypochondriac regions. Now, you may have heard about hypochondriacs. Those are people that think they have other illnesses that they don't have. The Greek and Latins felt that right here was where all illnesses came from, like from the liver and the stomach area. So those hypochondriac regions below the ribs there. Now, inferior to the hypochondriac regions, on the lateral aspects, you have the lumbar regions, which means between the ribs and the hips. And we have the right lumbar and the left lumbar. Down inferior to that, on the lateral regions, you have either the inguinal or the iliac. It can be called either. Inguinal is pertaining to the groin, and iliac is pertaining to the hip bones. So the right inguinal or iliac and the left inguinal or iliac. So once you know your directional terms, and there is that supplemental video on Blackboard, you should be able to answer questions like this. Which region is superior to the umbilical region? You need to know your regions and your directional terms. So is it the epigastric, the hypogastric, the hypochondriac, or the lumbar? Superior to the umbilical is the epigastric region. Name the abdominal pelvic region that is located in the central region near the navel or the umbilicus. Is it the inguinal, the umbilical, the lumbar, or the hypochondriac? And it is the umbilical. Name the abdominal pelvic region that is located in the lower middle below the umbilical region, or we could say inferior to the umbilical region. Is it the inguinal, the epigastric, the lumbar, or the hypogastric? And hypogastric it is. So I want you to be able to know those 9 abdominal regions and the directional terms. Now if we divide the abdomen into quadrants, drawing them into 4 across on there, we have the patient's right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. Now, abbreviations, you should be familiar with these, are just the first letter of each of those words. So RUQ, right upper quadrant, RLQ, right lower quadrant, LUQ, left upper quadrant, and LLQ, left lower quadrant. Some directional terms that I want you to be familiar with. We've already talked about superior or inferior. Superior above, inferior below. In addition to inferior, especially in animal models, we usually call it caudal or pertaining to the tail. We've talked about anterior or ventral being the front side and posterior or dorsal being the back side. Now, when we talk about palpating or feeling, we can either feel superficially, close to the surface, or deep, pushing into the abdominal cavity. So that can be palpation. Now, we've talked about medial and lateral. So medial is more towards the middle of the body, the central part of the body. Lateral is more towards the outer side of the body. So when you're in anatomical position, the pinky side of the hand and the arm is medial, and the thumb side is lateral. Now, of your limbs, you can be attached close to the body or further from the attachment to the body. So proximal is closest to the attachment, and distal is further from the attachment. So the shoulder is proximal, the fingers are distal. The shoulder is proximal, the elbow is more distal. But if we compare the elbow to the fingers, the elbow is more proximal, the fingers are more distal. Here, the thigh is more proximal, the knee is more distal. Laying down, we can be laying down on our spine, supine on our spine, facing up, it's got the word up in it, or laying on our belly, prone. So those are also terms that can be used for positions. Now, different planes of the body, those of you guys going into X-ray definitely need to know these, but all of us need to be familiar, and it is something I want you to know out of this chapter. So we can slice the body in different directions or planes. And this green one, if we slice the body, separating the front of the body from the back of the body, anterior, posterior, ventral, dorsal, this is what the view looks like, and that is the frontal or the coronal. And I'll show you a frontal slice of the brain. It does kind of look like a crown or coronal. Sagittal or lateral, this blue one, if we slice the body so that we separate right from left, then here's what it looks like. It could be mid-sagittal, right down the middle of the body, or it could be off to the side, depending on what we're looking for, sagittal or lateral. If we take a pink horizontal slice here, transverse or axial, that's what the body looks like there. And it could be a transverse through the head, the brain, through the chest, the abdomen, depending what we want to see. MRIs, magnetic resonance imagery, will take all of these views. Regular X-ray, we can position the person frontal or lateral. CT scans only do transverse or axial cuts. So here again is showing what the brain looks like in a frontal or coronal plane, separating the front from the back of the body. Sagittal, separating right or left. This happens to be a mid-sagittal, but it could be off to the side more. And transverse axial, what the brain looks like, cross-section. So which plane would separate the ears into two different planes? Is it frontal, transverse, or sagittal? And it is sagittal, as that separates the right from the left. So in your book, you're going to have your blue words, and I'm going to have you review those on your own, but I'm just going to point out a few things as we go through those. We talked about histo, and a histologist then would be the person who specializes in the study of tissues. We talked last week about ilium, I-L-I-U-M, being the hip, and I-L-E-U-M being a part of the small intestine. So be careful with that. We also talked about being careful. We talked about sarco, meaning flesh, as in sarcoma being a fleshy connective tumor, a malignant tumor. But this unit, we're talking about sacro, over the sacrum, that triangle bone at the bottom of your spine. Be careful you don't mix up sacro and sarco with that. Now, a couple suffixes we've talked about to be careful with are ectomy, tomy, and stomy. So here's a clicker question for you, and it is, which term means the process of cutting the skull? So let's put this together and see if you think it's thoracotomy, craniotomy, discectomy, or arthroscopy. And the correct answer is a craniotomy. Tomy is to cut into or make an incision. Cranio is the skull. A thoracotomy would be an incision into the chest. A discectomy, ectomy, remember, is removal, excision, to cut out, resect, and so that is to cut out or remove disc, which is in the vertebral column. It is the little cushions in between the vertebrae. And arthroscopy, scopy, we also said is a common suffix that we'll see is the process of viewing arthro, the joint. Now again, if you're looking for pronunciation, you can use the pronunciation guides at the end of your chapter. You also have the audio pronunciation on Evolve, and if it's a straight line, it's a long vowel, says its name. If it's a curved line, it's a short vowel. If it's in capitalized or bolded syllable, it's the accented syllable. So adipose, caudal, distal, trachea. So study your flashcards. Study your flashcards for chapters 1 and 2. Email me if you have any questions. So we said for this chapter, I want you to know larynx, pharynx, and trachea, not only the combining forms, laryngo, pharyngo, and tracheo, but what they are. Larynx is the voice box, pharynx is the throat, and trachea is the windpipe. Ureter and urethra. Ureter, 2 E's, combining form uretero, is the 2 tubes that go from the kidneys to the bladder, and urethra, 1 E, is the tube that goes from the bladder to the outside of the body. Be able to build and break down your words, practice those, know those 9 abdominal regions and the 4 abdominal quadrants. Know your position and directional terms as well as the planes of the body. And there is a supplemental video under additional videos and interest in Blackboard if you need. Thank you much and good luck.